Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Now, get a little feedback. That's good. This is going to be, it's a contract class, so we're going to go in depth. All right, we are hoping, I am quite confident that we're going to finish the purchase and sale contract today. I really thought we would last time, but obviously I like to go in pretty deep. So let's get going before, time gets away from us. All right, we are on the section called definitions. Definitions is one of those things that I think you should pay close attention to because a lot of people miss things. So, for instance, there's a difference between a banking day and a business day. So, I personally think a banking day is better than business days. Because it's something that can be better measured. Banks are open or closed, and so there are days that they won't be open. Binding agreement date, the date when all the parties accept the offer. Broker, client, a lot of these are pretty straightforward, right? Closing, pretty long definition of closing. So, closing is deemed consummated when the closing attorney confirms to the parties that the closing attorney is in receipt of all required paperwork, funds, and approvals necessary to complete the transaction and directs for funds to be dispersed and documents to be reported. And it talks about, obviously, it takes time for things to happen. Customer, meaning party that's not represented as a client. Then, of course, in addition to business days and banking days, there are just days, which is most of the days in the contract. Most of the timelines are referred to as just days, which is where we get that beautiful thing that says that it ends at 11:59 p.m. And of course, 11:59 p.m. is a horrible time to try and do business. So you may choose to do something in a special step, which we will talk about next week as we get deeper into the contract. Material relationship. This is one that I think is important. Any actually known personal, familial, social, or business relationship between the broker and the broker's affiliated licensees and any other party to this transaction which could impair the ability of the broker or affiliated licensees to exercise fair and independent judgment relative to their client. So that's a statement, Dan. You got that, right?
Social. Can you explain that?
I mean, what I will say is this is today's surprise moment because that is not what it used to say.
Right. Does it include Facebook friends?
But yeah, so if we're friends, right, then that counts. If it's somebody that you have, go to running club with, that's a social relationship that you have above and beyond random stranger off the street. You should, I think, disclose any and all possible material relationships whenever possible. It's just like disclosing defects with the house and anything else. Why wouldn't you disclose it? It doesn't hurt you. It doesn't cause you any issues. It just prevents any future issues from being, somebody saying that was not fair. I'll give you an example.
If I'm connected to somebody on LinkedIn, is that a material relationship?
No, I think you have to have, just because you're connected on a social media platform doesn't mean that you have a material relationship with them.
Good.
Right?
I agree.
I have thousands of people that I'm connected to on social media that I don't even know who they are, right? So that doesn't make a material relationship, but that could be an indicator of an additional relationship. And so if you're connected on LinkedIn and you used to work together and your kids used to go to school together, or you used to go to school together, or any of those sorts of things, that absolutely is a material relationship that you just should disclose. I'll give you another one because what it says here is, between the broker or the broker's affiliated licensees and any other party in the transaction. So if I refer somebody to you that is a friend of mine and you don't know them before I referred them to you, would you disclose that?
I wouldn't, but I could be wrong.
I would, because it is a relationship between the broker and one of the parties to the contract. Right? So you want to look at every
definition.
possible relationship that might be there. Um,
I have a referral from another agent. We have a referral agreement set up.
mhm.
That now thinking through it, that seems material to any business that I do with this client. That someone
Well-
else is going to make money if
So material relationship is not so much the disclosure of referral fees and things.
okay.
It's more of a relationship of someone that's, and that's the piece in here is it could potentially impair the ability of the broker to be fair and independent, right? So the fact that you got referred from someone else, if they're, someone else's daughter, for instance, right? Which we see a lot where people refer their kids. And so, okay, that's their kid, and they would be not necessarily fair and or impartial, but you're not the kid's parent, and you don't have a relationship with that other person other than, you got the referral. So it's effectively a stranger in your world. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Last one, pretty straightforward. Using initials in A, any variation thereof seemingly means not applicable. It's kind of important sometimes to fill those out just to make sure that if you're leaving something blank, there's no question, right? If you leave it blank, maybe you missed it. If you put in A, it's clear that you are not speaking to that section. All right, on to the next. Any questions on definitions?
Nope.
All right. Warnings to buyers and sellers. These are, I would make people read these because if this happened, and I know it doesn't happen all the time, but if you're the poor person whose client gets cyber frauded for $500,000, you probably want to make sure they read this paragraph, right? Because if they didn't read this paragraph, they might do things that would cause themselves to be more at risk. It goes to great detail of how things are done. And you just, oftentimes see the fake verifications of things and things like that. So make sure you read through that. Make sure you have your clients read through it. I mean, it wouldn't be a horrible thing to have them initial next to it. It would be fine. Heightened identification procedures to help prevent fraud. Covenant not to sue. This is an important one. This is people trying to sell, and if you've ever been involved with this, it's really ugly. We have had many people over the years that I've dealt with that have tried to sell properties they didn't own by pretending to be the people that own the property. And so it's always important to get information that you can confirm the seller's identity with some kind of current government photo ID, making sure you meet in person or through some kind of audio-visual conference to confirm the seller's identity. Because just having somebody send you a picture of a driver's license and talk to you on the phone, how do I know that's the right person, right? Like, I mean, people call and you sound like what you sound like over the phone and you have no idea who that is. So this is all in here as to help prevent fraud. So both of these paragraphs are pretty straightforward on really focusing on trying to prevent fraud, which of course happens a lot in real estate. Questions about either of those?
You made a mention of an initial. That crossed my mind before you mentioned it, Brett, in the sense that all these definitions or expansions on the basic, front page, some of them are more important than others. It seems like maybe they should make a provision where that's like a required step before somebody signs off on the last page. Just a thought.
Yeah, and one of the things is that obviously when you sign a contract, you're proclaiming that you have read and understand the entire thing. But we all know that people are human and they don't pay as close attention to everything as they should. And so, yeah, I don't think that there's anything wrong with having somebody initial next to a specific paragraph that you feel like is important. And you might even have one that's important for, one person and more important for another person, and, just given their situation, right? So just something to consider. But yeah, I think this paragraph 6 in particular is one that it wouldn't hurt to have a little set of initials next to, just to say, be careful as we go into a closing, because wire fraud is a huge thing at this time, right? We've been looking at housing, and so nobody cares that we've been looking at houses and all that sort of thing. But now that we go under contract, people start to pay attention, the hackers start to get in there, and you got to pay attention. So it's one of the things to look at. All right, this one, I love paragraphs that are in all bold, right? Like this is kind of their approach, Dan, to the initialing is, let's just put it all in bold, so that it stands out as best as it can on the paper. And this is the limit on the broker's liability. Buyer and sellers acknowledge that under no circumstances the brokers will have any liability greater than the amount of the real estate commission paid hereunder to the broker, excluding any commission amount paid to a cooperating real estate broker, if any, or if no real estate commission is paid to the broker, then the sum of $100. And notwithstanding the above, shall have no liability in excess of $100 for any loss of funds as the result of wire or cyber fraud. So this is kind of the CYA of this contract. It was written for the Georgia Association of Realtors, for realtors, to protect realtors. This paragraph is one of the heavier protections that we have from the standpoint of that they can't get more than $100 from us, or maybe they can get the commission under certain circumstances. But that's pretty much it. Any questions on that? All right. Exhibits and addenda. All right. This section is a section that many people kind of miss and don't do quite right. So what you need to think about is, as you look at all of these pre-written exhibits that could potentially be attached to the agreement, think to yourself, which ones do you need? Now, we're going to go into, I know this is surprising, we're going to go into great detail, and we're going to go through each exhibit, not just the ones listed here, but all of them. And we will go into great detail into financing, great detail into backup agreements, into sale or lease of buyer's property contingencies, all of those things, the disclosures, everything. But this is a good list to kind of look through and say, all right, which of these things apply, which of them don't. It's very important that you label them. And I think, just from a matter of fact, when you're presenting an offer, whatever order you label them, and typically people label them with letters, A, B, C, D, E, you would keep them in that order right behind the contract. So if your lead-based paint exhibit was A, that would be the first thing that would come behind the contract. So just one of those things from an organizational standpoint, make sure that you have them. This list is in alphabetical order. As we pointed out in sales meeting the other day, the no financing contingency exhibit is also what many people think of as the cash exhibit. It's under no finance, not cash. So make sure you look down the screen, down the list to get it. And try not to use the other boxes if it's written up here, right? It just makes you look bad. So any questions about this other than obviously we'll go into great detail in the exhibits themselves, but in the actual checkboxes and labeling of them here, any questions?
I've used this to attach HOA documents or other informational pieces that I feel like could come back to bite me if it's not very
In a
explicitly
part of the contract?
disclosed. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's pros and cons to that. You know, the obviously putting it in the contract means that it is part of the transaction, right? And so that's not necessarily a bad thing. But you know, sometimes you want to keep the contract a little bit clean. And so, but there are definitely situations where I would absolutely agree that you should put those things in there because you're trying to make sure that everybody really understands what they're looking at. So I don't disagree with that. But yes, yeah, you can put, I mean, theoretically put just about anything in the contract. You know, you can put your little letters, your whatever. I tend to lean against most of those things, just from a practice standpoint. But you know, like take an example where someone's buying a house and they've told you that they're really interested in doing short-term rentals in it, and you've told them that the association doesn't allow that, and they just keep going forward and they're not represented, they're not your client. Yeah, I'd probably put the association rules and regs in there that says that short-term rentals are not allowed. That way they can't come back and say, well, you didn't give me that. Well, it's in the contract that you signed. So, you know, that would protect you from that. So definitely something to think about. All right. Signatures. All right, this is a good one. These are the signatures. This is pretty straightforward, right? Well, it is and it isn't. So here's the thing. If you're representing the buyer or the seller, you want their name and the date and their signature. Their address for receiving notice, their phone numbers, and email addresses are not necessary because since you represent them, all communication will go through you. The only time I believe that these lines should be filled out for either the buyer or the seller is if you have an unrepresented party, because that means that we need to have some form of communication for them. Otherwise, we won't have the ability to communicate with them other than hand delivering things, which we don't want to have to do in this day and age. So if they're not represented and you don't put an email address right here for a seller that's not represented, you can't email them the contract. Remember, the contract says that you can use the communication methods that are provided. If there's not one, then all you can do is hand deliver it. So you need to be aware that's why you would put stuff in here, but otherwise you would not. Obviously, as you continue down, you have the broker's information, the buyer and the seller's broker. All of this information should be filled in. And as a pet peeve of mine, I can't stand it when people make offers and don't fill out the other side, especially if you represent a buyer and there's a listed property. All of this information is pullable from the MLS, so there's no reason not to fill it all in. Now, interestingly enough, changing these things or adding, you know, that your realtor membership is the Atlanta board or the CAB board or whatever does not constitute a change to the contract. So it's fine if you leave something blank and you have to fill it out. You don't have to have everybody initial it. But it's always better to put all of this information on here, as I think that makes things better. Any questions about signatures and information?
Why are we still using fax?
I mean, I imagine it will go away one day, but it is technically still a viable mode of notification. Now, here's the trick. If you don't put the fax number on there, they can't fax you.
Right.
Right? So if
Good.
you are someone that believes it's 2024 and you shouldn't have to find a fax machine or come to the office to get the fax that came into the office, just take the fax number out, right? Don't put it in there. Because again, the same thing, if you forget to put there, and this is one that peeves me, is that you are representing a buyer and you're putting in the seller's an offer on a listed property, and you put the broker's name, the brokerage name, you don't put the agent's name, you don't put their email address. Guess what? What is your legal form of notification now?
To the broker.
You have to hand deliver it to the brokerage firm.
Mhm.
Because you can't mail it because there's no address. You can't phone them. You can't call them. You can't fax it. You can't email it because none of those things are on there. So you got to make sure all that stuff's on there, or else
Yeah.
it just causes an issue.
Yeah. Brett, since one of our previous classes, I have stopped putting my fax number because
Excellent.
I don't want it sitting in the office on a fax machine for 3 days and
I don't disagree
nobody
with
sees
you.
it's there. It's
Yep.
like, yeah, just
And-
stop.
And that's the thing, we used to have all kinds of systems in place for when faxes came in to make sure that we quickly notified the people that they were sent to, because, well, that was one of the main ways that we got things. But now nobody pays attention. I mean, it could sit there even during the week. It might sit there for a few days, right? Like, because well, I didn't even notice that there was something on the fax machine, or somebody picked it up and printed something and moved it out of the way, or whatever, right? Like, it's not the most reliable anymore. So I think absolutely taking fax numbers off is not a problem, and I don't have any issue with you taking the fax number off of the broker either, from that standpoint. All right, binding agreement date. We talked a lot about binding agreement date in the paragraph. This is where you fill out the date and who fills it in. So we won't go into too much detail with that. But
On the previous slide where there's a fillable field for the date, is it okay to leave that blank and let dot loop do the date?
yes,
Okay, thank
yeah,
you.
as long as there's a date somewhere associated with the signature, which is really what you're what that date is really referencing, the signature. It's not really referencing everything else. So yeah, that's fine.
Great.
All right, good question. All right, I know it's hard to believe, but we got through that in like 30 minutes, and that's it. That's it. That is the end of the contract. So while it took us, 3.5 hours to do it, we're done. So we'll go forward in our next sessions. We're going to do obviously all the exhibits, but next week we're going to do special stipulations, because I think we want to go ahead and jump into that, because we'll get lost in the exhibits, to be honest. It's going to take us, we're going to do them in order of priority. Obviously, we're going to do financing first. Well, we might do disclosure first. I don't know. We'll do one of those first. And then we'll get through those and try to group them as best we can. But we really want to get through all of those. And so we'll do special stipulations next time, because special stipulations are probably the most wrongly done thing in a contract. If I had to quantify, other than just leaving random things blank and not filling out the contract properly, the way that people write special stipulations is more often wrong than not. So we will go into great detail how to write a good stipulation, a bunch of resources for stipulations, and what to do if you're concerned about your stipulation not being functional. And we'll go through all of that. So any questions about the contract? I appreciate y'all coming in and participating today as we wrapped up the final little bit of the contract.
Wow, that's it.
I know, right? Like, we've just been going. Every time we run up against the clock, but I just wanted to finish this one out and not jump into something new at the same time. So I'll give you 30 minutes of your day back.
Wow.
And you can go, try and get a new client.
And actually use the contract.
And hopefully write it off.
Mhm.
All right. Well, if there's no
Great.
more questions, I appreciate you all coming. And as always, I'm here if you have any questions or need anything, and we'll go from there.
Well
Thank you.
done.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.